Thank you. We'll start this press conference out with a statement by myself and then a follow-up with Assistant Chief Major Mooney as we talk about the specific incidents of violence that have plagued this community now for approximately 3 months. More than a month ago, we stood before you to discuss the unprecedented levels of violence in this community. Unfortunately, the trend has continued into the new year. We understand the drivers of long-term systemic violence. We've studied them. We've explored the root causes of community violence to include poverty, exclusion from educational or living wage opportunities. We understand institutional supremacy and racism and its effects. Charlottesville does not need another commission, does not need another task force or forum to understand or address violence here. We are a resource-rich community. We understand what it takes to improve the quality of life for all of our residents and to create a just community where all can live safely and without fear. Yet beyond traditional police responses, police presence, reactive responses, patrols, arrest of individuals involved in these incidents, investigations, or more cameras, little more has occurred. So what can this community do? How do we collectively contribute to solve the problem so our actions are aligned with our words and not merely rhetoric? We unite all of our resources. I'm calling on all individuals, all organizations who called for change since 2017 to get involved. I'm calling on community advocates, influencers, organizers to go beyond Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, your news interviews, podcasts, or social media mediums to leverage your collective resources. What are you willing to contribute to solve the problem? More than sitting on a board or making your opinions known, what are you willing to do? What jobs are you willing to offer? Tutoring, training resources, mentoring, presence in the communities affected, mental, emotional, and health resources to treat the trauma and secondary effects of trauma in our communities. I have witnessed this community coalesce around issues it cares about: social justice, police reform, historical and institutional racism and supremacy. Community violence is a legacy, and our children are their inheritors. What are we willing to do here in Charlottesville to reshape, recontour, and rectify a 400-year legacy? Thank you.
So I don't have a prepared statement ready, but I will talk a little bit about 2020 and what we experienced here in Charlottesville. Charlottesville Police Department responded to 195 calls for shots fired, so just under 200. 122 of those were confirmed shots fired cases, meaning we found evidence of gunfire, shell casings, and in numerous cases, there were victims associated with that. 20 aggravated assaults, 4 homicides, as you know, 3 in November and then 1 in December. 2021, as you can tell from the news over the last week, has not started out any better. Multiple shots fired calls with a number of casings, some cases 20 plus casings. We have people that are shooting wildly. In our cases on Tuesday, we had 2 incidents where apartment buildings were hit, and not just one apartment, multiple apartments. In one of those apartments, a woman lay in her bed and a bullet traveled right through her mattress. Another woman was struck in the forehead. These are innocent victims that have nothing to do with that, whatever is causing this violence. And it has to end, and it has to end now.
And with that, we will present just what this community looks like right now, so we can get actual visuals and not just words of the unprecedented levels of violence in this community that should shake the core of this community. As you can see, the yellow markers are every time we found a shell casing out in the street in which we were able to locate. This is the number of guns we've been recovering recently. Tyler, are we able to take questions from the media?
Yes. Yeah. Do you guys want to start, and then I'll just circle through the individuals who are on with us virtually.
Yes.
And guys, if you, for those of you who are attending virtually, just please hit the raise your hand icon, and I'll call on you one by one.
Are you good, Macy?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Chief Brackney, so with everything going on right now, do you have any suspects that you're looking out for, any descriptions of suspects that the community can try to identify?
So in 3 of the 4 homicides, we've actually made arrests. In the shootings, we are making the arrests. We're posting those on our website. That is not enough to say, what are the suspects and who are we looking for? What we're trying to do is stop the next act or incident before it occurs. And that takes more than just proactive police work. That takes community involvement, influencers in the community, our activists in the community. As I said more than a month ago, what do our leaders in this community look like, and what are their responses as well? How are they willing to collaborate with each other and with us to get ahead of these types of incidents of violence? But I've said before, we know the drivers of violence. But in this community, the response is often after the fact. And that's in most communities, that until they're personally affected, their willingness to get involved is little more than sending an email or putting something on Facebook or Twitter. What are we willing to do in terms of our dollars? We're going into budget season. What does our budget look like to address community drivers of violence? And again, that will then get into other conversations about budget, but budgets are driven by the things that we say that we care about. And if there's this level of violence in our community, the underlying drivers are our educational systems. The underlying drivers are the decay in our social support systems and structures. Those are the reasons that there are often violence. However, that does not mean that we tolerate that type of violence in this community, nor should it be condoned. We understand the drivers of it. That doesn't mean that it is still allowed to go on. There are rules to how we respond to these types of incidents. But the community, and when I say community, it's a collective C, not just residents. It's everyone in the community, the businesses, the school systems, our elected officials, as well as, like I said, the faith-based communities, our not-for-profits. Every one of us have an opportunity to contribute and make a difference.
And as for that proactive police work, what exactly are you guys doing? Can you just lay out what the last few weeks has looked like trying to get an end to this violence?
So it's actually been the last month that we've been attempting to have a more heavier policing presence. But we, as I said more than a month ago, we can't arrest our way out of this. We cannot police our way out of this, the trauma and the violence that we're facing in this community as we speak. So yes, we have increased police presence. We're working with the entities that own where the residents are and most of those, and they're coming up with plans themselves as well. But again, most of these are reactive versus proactive approaches. We're going to need a long-term systemic approach. The mayor has organized more than a couple months ago, reimagining a just C-ville. And oftentimes it lands in just the criminal legal system as how we reimagine a just C-ville, but a just C-ville is more than that. It means addressing all of the underlying systemic ills that are going on. And this cannot be laid solely as a burden at the police department's feet. And that again is almost how the questions are always formed, as what is our response? And I can't do this by myself, nor can this department. This is a collective response from the community with a large C community.
Kind of piggybacking off what you just asked, a lot of people in the community are scared right now. Like you said, innocent lives are being affected by this. What is your message to those people?
So our message to those people is we understand fear. As I started out by saying that we should have a community where everyone can live across the board in fear. What we are telling them and everyone else that we are involved, what we're asking is that they get involved as well. This is going to take a collective effort. And I know, the typical thoughts and prayers are with anyone doesn't do anyone any good when they're feeling afraid, when their safety and their basic, their homes are being violated, right? You're being violated in the place that you feel most sacred. Then that community violation, your feeling safe shouldn't just be in your home, it should be in your community. So what I'm asking is then, as I just did, what are we willing to do? Get in contact with me so that we can say, what are those resources? We will coordinate the resources with you. If you don't trust the police department to do it, where are some of our influencers and community leaders? Again, completely silent on these issues. Now, there's not to say there's not being work done behind the scenes, but this is not a behind the scenes work any longer. This is we all need to come to the forefront and say that we're all collaborating and coming around these issues together as a team approach.
Very well said. Another question I have for you. Do you see a common denominator in all the suspects that you guys arrest and charge?
No, and what I mean by that, no, because I don't have enough information about their historical backgrounds and their individuals. There are certain things that you may have as data points that you may be looking for. And I will not go into the data points because they often get lost when we start talking about data and the nuances of those threads. If I'm a victim, do I really care about what they all have in common? What we should be solving is how we all got to this in the first place. And that common denominator is what I explained. Historical and institutional economic exclusion, educational opportunities for exclusion, living wages here in the city when you're fighting for $15 an hour. I can create my own underground economy that makes a lot more than $15 an hour. And unfortunately, with that comes underground economy rules. And often that is violence and the response of violence and power.
All right, Chief, we have Sandy Houseman from WTVF Radio on. Sandy, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone. Can you hear us?
Sorry, I was
That's okay.
looking at my recording and not at the chief.
That's okay.
Chief, can you tell us how many guns had you recovered over the last year? And is part of the solution something that can take place in Richmond this month? In other words, are you asking the legislature to do anything more in terms of gun control? And then I'd also like to know to what extent these problems, these shootings involve people who are not Charlottesville residents. Obviously, the high profile shooting on Hydraulic and Emmett, guys from out of town. And do you think any of this stuff is gang related?
As you know, I've been in front of the US Congress to talk about banning assault weapons. And that was not well received in this community when you talk about banning weapons that are meant for wartime. They're called assault weapons. And then we've tried to create a new picture of what that looks like by calling them sports rifles or something of that, recreational sports rifles. They are assault rifles that were meant to do exactly what the name and nomenclature is, assault. That is their primary purpose. In terms of the number of guns that are being recovered, Major Mooney may be better positioned to help me with that as our forensics teams. But these guns that you're seeing are more recent, not over necessarily the past year, and he'll be able to speak a little bit more to that. Yes, Richmond can help. And is it possibly better positioned to help going into its current legislative priorities and packages? I don't know what council has put before or is putting together as their legislative agenda for Richmond, as I've not been privy to that, and nor have they asked me about, at this point in time, my position on that. But everyone knows I have been very outspoken about what we could do around these incidents of violence. And I don't quite remember the other question.
I was asking to what extent the shootings involve folks from other places and whether you think many of these shootings may involve gangs.
So when we talk about other places, Charlottesville seems to feel comfortable in assuming and assigning other places as though there's no connection here. Though someone's legal address may be in Georgia, as you referenced, there's a connection that they have here. So they're not outsiders. These are persons who have either family members or friendships, acquaintances that bring them into this community. And again, that doesn't often sit well when we talk about Charlottesville, because we often seem to think that it is only outsiders who come into the community and do damage to the community. In terms of what gang related is, I'm going to be really careful because there are very strict definitions of what a gang are, and we throw those out there all the time as to what a gang member is, and we ascribe those type of descriptors to certain persons so that we can then have what does a gang look like. And often we start associating that with certain groups and stereotypes about what gangs and gang violence can look like. And I do not need to reference what happened yesterday to even talk about what gangs may look like in drivers of violence. But when Chief Mooney is probably better positioned for the actual number if he has that available in front of him.
So I would say the number of guns that we took into our possession in 2020 approached triple digits. I know of it's in the 90s. So I would point out too that the guns that we seize are illegally possessed or illegally obtained. That's why we take them. It's illegal to have them. So how they come into possession of these guns is not legal. Not legal. They don't go down to the sporting goods store and purchase them. And as far as gang activity, I would say that a lot of our cases may be connected, but there is a lot of violence. It's not tied to one particular group or one particular person.
Are you saying that because the guns were illegally acquired, that changes in the laws of Virginia would not make a difference?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just pointing out that they're illegally possessed and illegally obtained.
Do you see a place for additional restrictions on access to guns in the state?
I'm not going to comment on my political opinions on that. I'll just point out that we seize guns when they're obtained illegally or possessed illegally.
All right, Sandy, I got another reporter with their hand raised. Let me get to them, and let me skip over to Jesse Higgins. You're on with us. If you can unmute your microphone, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. One is probably for Assistant Chief Mooney. Can you tell me a little bit or elaborate about how both the number of guns seized and your shots fired this year compare to previous years?
2020 was significantly higher than the previous years. And the number of shootings that we actually have, we always get a lot of calls of shots fired. There's a lot of fireworks in Charlottesville, and sometimes those come in as shots fired. But the confirmed cases where you actually see casings and evidence of gun violence and you have a victim was significantly higher in 2020.
So is there a place where I can actually see those numbers? I know you guys put out a report every year.
I think Tyler could point you in the right direction to our open data portal that you can pull up those numbers. You can actually map where they're occurring.
Okay. My other question is something that you guys have kind of been talking about, but I wanted to actually address it very specifically in terms of your investigations into these shots fired and these homicides. In these investigations, as you're seeing this as a big picture, are you getting a sense of why all of a sudden there's this alarming increase in gun violence?
You know, I have some opinions of that. I think historically we've done the same thing over and over again. When we have a problem, we increase our police presence and we try to arrest our way out of it, and it's not working. The next generation of children see this. and it continues. There are no other options for some of our community, especially our younger community members. You know, they see the violence and they see the police come in, and that's not always a pretty picture. And it's not solving the problem long term.
Okay. Thank you. That was all I had. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you. Before I go back to Sandy for one last question, is there anybody else on this panel that would like to ask the chief or assistant chief a question? This is going to be the final part, so if you don't raise your hand now, just follow up with me afterwards. All right. All right, Sandy, you can go ahead and unmute. Just very quick, one last follow-up question you might have. And if you have any further ones, just send them to me afterwards, okay? Sandy, you can unmute your microphone. Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Just one quick follow-up question.
Yes, we've heard nationally of an upswing in violence, and it's been attributed to COVID, you know, kids being out of school and being probably bored. And also, I wish that the chief would elaborate on her earlier remark about trauma. What do you mean when you attribute all this violence to trauma, and how can the community address that?
So Sandy, I would be really careful, and the reports have not said that kids are bored and that's why they're shooting each other. COVID exasperates the breakdown in systems around economies, education, and poverty, as well as other ones. I think I would never ascribe this to boredom, and nor has any reports that I've seen ascribed this to boredom at all. In terms of trauma, I think we all understand what trauma is and what it does in the communities. So although I may not be an actual victim of shots fired, what does that feel like? I'm lying in my bed and I can hear shots fired going off. I can hear sirens going off. I can hear or see police processing scenes where there are bullets outside. I see the wreckage and the damage in vehicles where windows are shattered, or in residents when windows and doors are shattered. I see wreaths outside and memorials that are set up to those who have died in the community. That's trauma. And that trauma has been visited upon this community, and particularly on Black communities, for more than 400 years. So there's a lot of trauma that exists that we can address. And trauma is also a driver of violence. I'm not the first to say hurt people hurt people. That has been a theory in psychology and in counseling and mental health recovery and emotional wellness for years. So I think we understand trauma. The thing is, do we understand what it takes, and are we willing to do what it takes in this community to address trauma so that we are no longer dealing with violence at this level? So with that, I thank each and every one of you for being here. I look forward to hearing from this community in a way to collaborate and respond and bring resources together to address the violence in this community like I have never heard from them before. So thank you.
Can I ask one more question?